Dead on 5 o'clock and welcome. My name's Chris Tuck. I am a survivor of all forms of abuse and neglect. I run my own charity, helping adult survivors recover from the trauma of the abuse that they have suffered, either in childhood or adolescence or adulthood. And I am also a consultant to the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. I am here today to speak about domestic violence and child abuse in all its forms. And this is as a result of watching Home Truths with Ian Wright. It was on last night and I watched it this morning, and it just resonated with me so much that I felt the need to come on here and do a talk about the situation, and also to start opening up the conversation out there. Out there being in social media land, but obviously on all the different platforms, and to start getting people to talk about domestic violence and child abuse in all its forms, so that victim and survivors can come and discuss what has happened to them, and also get what has happened acknowledged, and that will enable them in turn to seek out the appropriate help and support for themselves. So, where do we start? There's so much to cover, so much to cover. And do forgive me for looking down at my notes, guys, but you can call it age, you can call it trauma, you can call it whatever you want, but my memory isn't as good as it used to be. And if it's not written down, I can waffle on. And if it's not written down, I can forget important points. So today is about, as I said, domestic violence and childhood abuse, but looking at it from different perspectives. So put yourselves in the shoes of the child. Put yourselves in the shoes of the woman or man that has been abused. Put yourselves in the shoes of the perpetrator and the perpetrator that was a victim. Put yourselves in the shoes of the authorities. Looking at this from all different angles will help us understand that it is highly complicated and very complex, and it will often need a multi-approach, a multi-pronged approach to tackling it. But at the end of the day, we just need to help children not be abused. Full stop. That is the bottom line of all of this. But there are many people out there that think that child abuse is not prevalent, and if it's not happening to them and theirs, then they don't need to worry about it. And I'm hoping to change your view on that if you do sit in that camp. Okay. So watching Home Truths with Ian Wright, as I said, brought up much for me, and I felt compelled to do this. Before we start, some of you may become triggered, so it's really important that you practice some self-care, and it's important that you do some grounding techniques, whatever that may be for you. You may need to leave, go for a walk and get some fresh air and just shake it off, or you may need to just come back and listen to this at a different time. So what I did, I watched the programme and I took quotes from the programme, and I'm going today give my views on this to open up the conversation. So Ian started off by saying anything that happened around the house that was wrong, he would get a smack or a clip around the ear, for example, or somewhere on his body. And over time, he just felt confused, and it made him an angry little boy. His word was angry little guy. And I hear this a lot, and I felt it myself. Growing up in 3 domestic violence households, I became very angry. The anger was simmering inside of me, and I didn't know how to express it. And many victims and survivors of abuse have this simmering anger. And if we're not able to express the anger in a beneficial way, we over time can implode or explode, i.e. take it out on ourselves or take it out on somebody else. And you will see this as a thread as we go through. And what I also liked about what Ian shared was that he said it took him 50 years to face up to what had happened. And again, this is common for most victims and survivors. And when they're ready to look at what they've been through, we often want to piece back our childhoods. And we also want to then try and find other people that have gone through similar. It's almost like trying to find a way to help yourself get out of the impact that you have felt or are feeling. So you try and find others that are in a similar place to you. I know some friends of mine that have cancer, so obviously they would join cancer groups and they would help and support each other. And this is what victims and survivors often do as well. They try and find people that have gone through similar situations, because you just get it, you just understand. Now, Ian was saying as he grew up, he was always trying to do his best. But what he was most proud of was just being a dad. He said he was lucky and he felt blessed, but things haven't always been easy. And sometimes he feels very sad, even though he's got lots to be thankful for. And I want you to hold on to that, because I personally can really resonate with that. I've got a lovely home, I've got a husband, I've got children. I've said this many times before, but sometimes there's an overwhelming sadness that comes over you, because in my particular instance, I don't have a mum anymore, I don't have a dad, and my stepmum and my stepdad were abusive as well. So there's no authority figure, so to speak, to go and ask for help, to get support from, or to ask their advice from. And that's never been there for my whole life, really. So, you know, so it's really hard, and every person has a different set of circumstances and a different situation. And as I go through this, Ian actually said that, you know, he loves and adores his mum, but at times he really hates her as well, particularly when he was a young boy. Now, I'm going to keep saying Ian because he brought a lot out in this programme, Home Truths. So he says growing up in the childhood home was not a happy one because there was lots of violence. And just to put that into perspective, he was saying in the UK over the last year, 1.6 million women have suffered domestic violence, and 90% of domestic violence cases, there is a child present. And he wanted to know, what impact does this have on the child growing up? And what type of adults would they actually become? And this is also a worry for many victims and survivors, often wondering what sort of parents they would make. And I know some victims and survivors chose not to become parents, because they didn't want to find themselves in a situation where they might abuse their own children. And that's very rare, to be honest. But that is an actual impact of going through childhood abuse or witnessing domestic violence. Now, the expert did say to Ian that you were a child, you had no choices, you were trapped then, but you are now an adult. You are no longer trapped. And that was to Ian when he asked why his mind kept going back to certain situations and certain incidences. Why would he be triggered to go back there? And why was he so angry? And she sort of like explained to him that it wasn't his fault, and that the anger he felt was the anger of his 9-year-old self. And that really, that made him feel different about the situation. I don't think anyone has ever told him that what he had been through was actually abuse and that it was not his fault. Many victims and survivors feel that they've brought the abuse on to themselves in some way. And many victims and survivors do not know that they have been abused in the first place. It's not until someone actually has a conversation with them and the awareness is there, the education is there, that they actually go, ooh, what I went through, what I experienced, that actually wasn't abuse. This is the impact. I can't live with this impact, so I need to go and get some help. Yeah, bear with me. So Ian went on to say that seeing violence as a child, it is still with him. He said he gets emotionally stuck with things that happened. And Ian's wife said, lots of people do not face up to situations or issues that they have within themselves. They bury it under the carpet or they don't deal with things. And again, victim and survivors, we do this. We do this a lot. Because one, we don't identify our behaviours to be a result of what we've gone through as children. And this is why we need to have open, honest communication and conversations so that the impact of what we've gone through as children can be dealt with. And if it is dealt with, if we are able to express our feelings and if we are able to change the destructive behaviours, it has a positive benefit to everyone around us. The fact that many families don't want to acknowledge that abuse has happened within the family, they're not acknowledging what's gone on for victims and survivors, and they're actually silencing them by their actions. So if anything resonates with you today, we need to offer a safe environment for victims and survivors to be able to come out and speak about their lived experiences, and those around us need to listen, not judge, and help us get the support that we need. They may not have the answers, they may not be able to help you one-on-one, but what they can do is help you find appropriate help and support and just be there for you. Yeah. So if you're wondering what to do if someone comes to disclose to you, just listen. Don't judge. Ask them, what is it you want me to help you with? Yeah. We could go to the police. We could go to this charity. We could, or you could phone up the Samaritans. Whatever it is for that victim and survivor, what they need right at that moment in time, and then revisit the conversation with them when they are able to do so. Okay, lovely. So let's not silence victim and survivors. Let's help them on their road to recovery. Let's not cause any further harm. And another thing Ian said that really resonated. He does not know why he gets dragged back to some very negative and horrible feelings, and certain things can trigger it. And he wanted to understand why. Ian explained that he remembers his stepdad hitting his mum, and he recalls how scared he was about what the stepdad would do to the mum. The siblings lived in constant fear. His older brother, Maurice, tried to protect him by covering over his ears. Now, in my family, we would try to protect each other, thinking that we were doing a good job. And we tried to de-escalate the situation. But the things we saw and the things that we heard, you could feel the energy in the room. And all of that stays with you. It literally lives in every fibre of your being. That feeling of fear. It's there. It's stuck. And I think many victims and survivors can resonate with that. Their abuser leaves the home. They feel like they can breathe. They feel like they can have a bit of normality. Soon as they know the abuser's coming back, the situation changes. They try and please the abuser. They try and keep everything on a happy, even keel. And then the abuser will just nitpick. They will look around for anything that's not been done to their set requirements, or they will try and create an incident where they can then perpetrate their abuse. And that went on in my family all of the time. And that kind of living toxic environment makes you hyper alert to sights, sounds and smells, and all of this becomes a trigger. And your body will actually pick up on these triggers before your brain even registers what is happening. That is just, if you really think about it, if you're a victim and survivor and you really think about it, you often have this gut instinct that something's about to happen before your brain even registers what is actually happening. Now, Ian and Mo, his brother, never really spoke about what happened in the family home until this programme. And neither did my siblings and myself. We all left home on or around our 16th birthdays. We tried to get on living our lives as best we could. We were all living with the impact of seeing, witnessing, experiencing domestic violence, child abuse in all its forms and neglect, whilst trying to forge ahead with building our families, our lives and our careers. And that will be the same around the country in many households where victims and survivors are literally just trying to get on with living their lives. You're literally locking up your pain from the past, not knowing that it's going to come knocking on your door at different times and in different ways. I helped all of my siblings out over the years, mentally, emotionally, physically and financially. And we finally came together in 2012 when I wrote our book, Through the Eyes of a Child. At the time, I felt like I was living a very inauthentic life. I couldn't speak my truth. I felt like I was suffocating. I felt like I was hiding behind this mask and facade that I'd built up for myself. And I just had an overwhelming urge to speak my truth, express how I was feeling, share what had happened, explain the impact, and just help other people that might be in similar situation to myself and my siblings. Now, I wrote the book from my perspective, from my lived experiences, but my siblings, my two brothers and sister, also wrote a chapter in the book about what they had gone through and the impact that it had had on them. So the book shares many perspectives, from a male perspective, from a female perspective. It also showed really the hierarchy of the family and how that played out in the complexities of the abuse, and also who left home first, who remained behind, and what our roles were within the family. Yeah, it was quite an interesting read with hindsight. Everything's great with hindsight. You can work out a lot of things. And the book, our hopes and dreams of the book, was to open up the conversation. It was to break the taboos and the stigmas around abuse. It was to highlight the impact of domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, and show how, if you get the right help and support, how you can change your life or improve it for the better. Now, Ian said in conversations with his siblings that it brought back lots of memories. Some were fleeting memories and some were as vivid today as they were 50 years ago. So some were fleeting and some were as vivid today as it was 50 years ago. And this is why I hate the term historic abuse, because when people say historic, it's almost like it's an event that happened in the past and it has no consequences or impact in the today, in the here and the now. So we use the term non-recent because it isn't current abuse, but the impact is with you in the here and the now. Now, Ian was saying at the age of 9, he remembers really clearly feeling anxious and scared. He said, at home you could sense the mood. You knew you were going to hear or see some trouble. He recalled specific abusive acts towards his mum and how helpless she was. He recalled specific cruel acts towards himself. He said, I remember hating him so much, but being completely scared of him. He was so big and his voice was so growly. And he said doing the documentary, Home Truths, was about finding peace for himself and for his mum. Writing Through the Eyes of a Child was about finding peace for me and my siblings, because we didn't get any justice as children. In 2016, we started the family case through the criminal justice system. We're still trying to get some form of justice today, and I can't speak about the details of that at the moment, but just to say we are challenging the criminal justice system and the law. We have a solicitor and barrister fighting our case, and we will be sharing the ups and downs of all of this in the future about our journey through the criminal justice system with you all. All I can say, it's been re-triggering, re-traumatizing, and we are paving the way, hopefully, for many victims and survivors that are going to come up through the process after us. Now, back to Ian. He said in order to piece his life back together, he needed to go back to where it all began, in southeast London. They left there in 1973, but he went back to the family home and inside the room that the family actually lived in. When he was there in that environment, the memories came flooding back. He remembered where the furniture was, what the wallpaper looked like on the wall, where his parents slept, where his siblings slept, where the acts of violence took place, and he recalled vividly how he felt, what his emotions were at the time. Now, one of these memories that he had was Match of the Day. He loved Match of the Day. Of course, he became a well-known footballer. When he heard the music, he would love to watch the programme. But his stepdad would make him turn away from the TV and face the wall, just because he could. Ian said hearing the music and not being able to watch the programme was torture for him. He said the stepdad was just being completely unnecessarily cruel. And this is what most abusers, perpetrators of abuse do. It's all about power and control to them. It's about making you do what they want when they want. And as children, you have no say at all. And, you know, Ian was saying that it made him cry so much. And he felt his stepdad willing him to turn around so that he could reprimand him for doing so. And I have so many examples of that kind of scenario that happened in our households over the years. One of them, for example, was with my stepmother. She used to line us up after a crime had been committed. So this crime was made up. So after a crime had been committed in the house, she would line us all up and she would literally look at us all, ask us who was it, and if we didn't own up or tell on the person that did it, we were all going to be punished. And she would make us look at her, but when we looked at her, she would then say, "Don't you dare look at me. Who do you think you are?" And then hit us for looking at her. Now, in one of my jobs, I was a business manager for the Priory Hospital in my local area. And the hospital director noticed that I didn't look her in the eye, especially when things were a bit agitated or there was a bit of conflict going on. And she said to me, you know, not looking someone in the eye is quite disrespectful and it means different things. And I was like, well, why? I said, but looking you in the eye all of the time feels really uncomfortable to me. I feel really uncomfortable. I feel really triggered. And she basically had a chat with me about my childhood, and she sort of like explained to me that it would have been something connected to what I went through. And it made me think, and I remembered that incident with the stepmother and the eye contact. And it's basically the fear of punishment that was so deep within me that when the conflict happens in the workplace, I couldn't maintain the eye contact. And that is what helped me break that cycle of behaviour when I made the link to how I was acting or responding to people and what had happened in my childhood. And for me, match of the day music was not a good thing. Stepfather loved football. Football was on a Sunday. Sunday was pub day. Pub meant alcohol, meant he came home drunk. Before he came home, it was, we've got to clean the house, we've got to cook the dinner, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. Be on your best behaviour, don't upset him. So there was lots of anxiety building up before he even came back from the pub. The key went in the door. We all fell silent. The dinner would be on the table. We'd all be sitting there quietly. He would come in. He couldn't pick a fight because everything was done to a T. We was all quiet. Yet he would find something to pick a fight over. And often it would end up with him tipping the whole table up and over and the dinner going on the floor. Can you imagine the fear that put into us? Well, I can tell you the impact of that. For many, many years, I hated Sundays, I hated football, I hated hearing match of the day music, I hated anybody that drank alcohol, and I literally could not sit up the table to eat a dinner on Sundays or Christmas. Any time where you had to sit up the table for a long period of time and have nice conversations with people, I couldn't do it. I became so triggered. I used to try and find ways of getting down from a table, i.e. when I went to my mother-in-law's at Christmas, when everybody was having a lovely time, you know, just talking, having a conversation, I would expect something negative to happen. And because of my PTSD and my hyperarousal, I couldn't sit up the table. That's how deep this stuff goes. And again, with hindsight, when you look at the incident and how you respond, you can break the cycle and you can create new ways of dealing with things and behaving in a different way. And if the people around you understand the situation and where you are coming from, then you can have conversations about it and you can change everyone's opinion around you, and also how you respond to them and how they respond to you. Now, in this program, Ian was talking about his mum and how she took her pain out on him. So she was actually a victim, what we know as a victim perpetrator. So she was a victim herself in her own life, but she was also a perpetrator because, and you know, we know this isn't right, but we also know it happens often, especially in families. He said his mum made him feel worse because she used to beat him and she used to say really emotionally negative and destructive things to him, like, I wish I had terminated you. To a 9-year-old boy, you can only imagine how that made him feel. And just to show that Ian was not on his own in that situation, my brother shared in the book exactly what went on for him as well. He says, from what I can remember, the beating started for me almost as soon as I was there, when we went to live back with my mum, when I was 11 and my brother would have been 4 or 5 years younger. Mum hated me, I could tell. She let me know all the time, you look like your father. Then she would beat me. At the time, I had a problem wetting the bed, and she would grab my head and rub my face in the sheets, punching me. Then he would come in and she would bring him in and he would punch and kick me. Now, that's just a snippet because, as I said, I don't want to trigger people, but I just want to show you that Ian is not on his own with this victim-perpetrator situation. Now, also, when Ian said his mum used to say, I wish I had terminated you, my brother was in a similar situation. When my mum was literally on her deathbed in the Maudsley Hospital from a brain hemorrhage when she was 44, we thought she was dying. And she turned round to my brother and told him that she was really sorry and that she did love him. He says, I can't describe how that felt, but as soon as she came round after her operation, she asked for me and whispered to me, I lied. You look like your father and I hate you. For her, that was it. To me, this is my brother, she was scum and she will always be scum. Now, in Ian's situation, as I said earlier, he said that he loves and adores his mum, but he also hated her at times. And Ian was saying how this has affected him later on in his life, and facing up to his memories, he wanted to do something different. He wanted to understand, if possible, where his mum was coming from. And I will explore that a bit more with you later on. Ian also said, facing up to all of the memories whilst doing this programme, it made him want to reach out to do something that he'd never done before. And that was to talk to other survivors, people that had been through similar things to him. I did that by writing the book. It's why I started a peer-to-peer support group at the time, back in 2013. It's why I applied to be on the VSEP, the Victim and Survivors Consultative Panel. It's why I've become a campaigner, a public speaker, and lately an activist. I wanted to see change that benefits victim and survivors now and in the future. And many victim and survivors, when they start their journey of healing, they come to the same place. When they find their voice, they become empowered and they really want to put themselves in a position where they help other people in similar situations. And that is absolutely fantastic. But please make sure that you put boundaries around what your offer is in order to keep yourself healthy, sane and well. Yeah, because helping other people at different stages of their journey can be re-triggering for you and can also be too much for you at a certain time. And then it puts your own recovery back. So you have to be very robust in what you can offer, how you can help and support, and also what are your strengths? Where do your strengths lie? Are you better at writing? Can you blog? Are you better at speaking? Can you do this kind of thing? Can you raise awareness? Can you go to have talks with different people? Even if it is on a one-to-one basis with family and friends that want to listen. Because many people do not want to talk about childhood abuse or domestic violence. They don't want to talk about the impact. They don't want to hear about what you've gone through and how it's impacted you. Because it's too frightening, it's too big, and it's just not a nice thing to talk about, is it? But the fact is, it impacts so many people that you're going to know somebody. You will. There will be someone in your family, in your friendship group, or a colleague at work, in your network somewhere, that if you just gave them 5 minutes, you would find out that they've been through something like this and they've been impacted. And you could be the one person that they could turn to for a chat, for help, for support, or just a listening ear. Yeah. So when Ian met up with different survivors, especially Charlie Webster, who's done and is doing a lot of very good work in trying to change the law to get children recognised in domestic violence situations and get it recognised that the impact of domestic violence, what that looks like and how it impacts children as they are adolescents and as they become adults. So here's just a few quotes that I want to share with you. The more he drank, the more unreliable his behaviour was. I never knew what was going to happen, what physical thing on me or my mum. I would try and make him less angry. There we go. I would try and make him less angry so that he wouldn't do things to my mum. And Ian was saying that, you know, his mum was verbally abusive towards him. And there was also the other survivors were sharing that they were told they weren't good enough, they were ugly, they were stupid, all the normal things that victim and survivors may be hearing on a day-to-day basis. And that saying, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you, rhyme has never been so wrong. Now, most of us, victim and survivors, we have to work out that it wasn't our fault. We were only children. The abuser had the power and the control. Now, Charlie Webster was saying in the programme that 1 in 5 children experience some form of abuse by the time they are 16. Currently, at the time of the documentary, and I now know that the DA bill has moved on quite a bit, the current law on domestic violence didn't even acknowledge the impact on children, but now it does, which is a good thing for everybody. Now, I just want to go back to what another survivor said. Hello again. Connection keeps going in and out, so I do apologise. So this survivor said, he made me feel horrible, weak, pathetic, and I didn't deserve to be alive half of the time. He would degrade my mum in front of me. I wish I was stronger and could have stopped it. And another survivor said it was all about the mind games and control. So even though we all have different experiences, it all does come down to power and control. From the abusers onto the children, or the abusers onto the victim of domestic violence, and that may be male or female. Now, one thing I found really interesting in the documentary was when Ian Wright was talking to the other survivors about what they had been through, he said it made him question the validity of his own experiences. He perceived, or he heard, the abuse of the other survivors was far more worse than what he had been through. So why was he feeling as bad as he was? And actually, why was he actually comparing his abuse to their abuse? Because at the end of the day, abuse is abuse. It's a crime and it shouldn't be happening. And you cannot compare the abuse that you've gone through or the impact that you have felt from that abuse. You cannot compare it with anybody else's. What you've gone through and the impact is valid, just as valid for you as it is the other person. Okay, so I want to make that quite clear. Do not compare yourself with anyone else. There will be individuals in this world that have gone through horrendous stuff, abuse, yet they may appear, or actually they may be, living with it a lot better than an individual that's gone through one incident of abuse. But that does not matter. What matters is the abuse you've been through, validate it, acknowledge it, and seek help and support if you need it. That's it. Ian also said that speaking to other survivors about what he had gone through and listening to what they had gone through, it actually made him feel a bit lighter. And the fact that people were telling him that it was not his fault and that we are all victims of this, it's, you know, victims of this abuse, made him feel differently. And he also said, again, I've said it twice now, this is the third time, I totally adore and love my mother, but other times I hate her. I don't know how I feel. It's very complex. And it is. It's not black. It's not white. It is so complicated. But one of the experts was saying to him that being abused by your parents is the worst betrayal in your life. You should be expecting unconditional love, but you were not getting that. You went from thriving to just surviving. And most victims and survivors are in survival mode most of their life until they recognise what they've gone through is abuse. They acknowledge the impact, or even connect that the impact, symptoms of what they're dealing with today with their mental health, their physical health, emotional health, their relationships, their careers, all of that. How has all of that been affected? And do you connect that impact with the abuse? And when you connect the impact to the abuse you went through, then you can start the healing process. You can start actually saying, my life is not happy, it's not healthy, it's not what I want. I'm living it this way, I'm behaving in this way. It's not bringing me happiness. So what is it that I'm not happy with, and what is it that I can change as a result of knowing what caused it in the first place? Now, I really resonate with this and connect with this. Ian said there was one person in his life who helped him. With all that chaos going on at home, there was one person, Mr. Pigden, his teacher. And, you know, you saw him meeting up with Mr. Pigden many years later, and he was absolutely beside himself in tears. And you saw how grateful Ian was to Mr. Pigden. Because, you know, Mr. Pigden gave him self-worth and made him feel important. And most of us only need that one person in our lives. So please bear in mind that you may be the only person in another child's life who can help them turn their life around. And it's such a simple thing to do. There was one person in my life that helped me turn my life around at different times. Obviously, my husband has always been there since I was 15. But Arwin's mum, she helped me get me into college, get me my bed sit, and she helped me leave that family home and start a whole new life for myself just before my 16th birthday. She gave me the validation that I could do all of that and be okay. And she helped me, supported me, and that's what Ian had. Yeah. And that's what many people do have. And if you can be that one person in someone's life, whether they're a child, a teenager, or an adult, you're doing a marvellous job. Thank you. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about was how schools are helping children now. There is pastoral care in schools. It's not perfect by a long means, but it is there. And part of the pastoral carer's job is just to make sure that children are happy. They can't change the home situation, but what they can do is try and plug the gaps, encourage, praise, and have a can-do attitude, and help children realise their potential. So if they're not getting that love, nurture and care at home, then schools are a good place to provide that. Caveat to that, there is lots of bullying going on at schools. Abuse does happen at schools. We know it, we see it, we hear about it. But there are many good teachers out there that do an outstanding job, and they do help turn children's lives around. Just like in Ian's case. In my case in primary school, I wasn't listened to. I was told off for having an overactive imagination, and that silenced me. That was one teacher. But then another teacher, or the dinner ladies, they gave us extra food and they helped us just feel less hungry, really. And, you know, so there are good people out there in every institution, and there are also these bad apples or couldn't care less people. Now, Ian was saying that we need to try and get children to understand what they are going through and what has happened to them. He says catching them at a young age so that they can deal with their emotions, so they don't fester, that has got to be a good thing. And I do agree with him, But there are many parents that don't want their children to know what they are going through is abuse, and that they can get help and that they can speak up about it. Yeah, because they're perpetrating the abuse in the family home, you know. So it's not, as I said, cut and dry. It's not as black and white, and it is complicated, but we all have a duty to step up and help protect children. Be an upstander, not a bystander. Don't be complicit in silencing children. Listen to them, listen to what they have to say, or look at how they're expressing themselves and asking them, can I help you? Do you have issues at home? Etc, etc. Now, Ian was saying or sharing, there was an organisation on the documentary called Safe Core. That's what I think it was anyway. And they worked with families to provide early interventions where there were concerns with the family. And what they would do was to educate and raise awareness with the parents, get there to be better communication within the family and support that family through difficult times. And they shared an example of where there was domestic violence within the family. I think there had been like one incident, but the parents constantly argued, and the mum had some mental health issues, and there was no understanding from the mum to the dad and the dad to the mum, and the daughter, the teenage daughter, got caught up in all of that. And she said, since taking part in the program, this Safe Core program or Safe Care program, things have become a lot better within the household. There was more understanding, more empathy, more communication, and that made her happy because her parents were actually listening to each other, supporting to each other, and they were arguing less and less. So where we see good practice like this or good outcomes, we need more of that. We need more of that intervention, yeah? Where there is love, care and nurture in a household, those interventions need to happen to keep the families together. But where there is no love, no nurture, and where there is clear abuse, surely we should be removing those children. Surely you cannot argue with that. Love to know your views. Now, people think that children, if they're not in the room, they don't see or hear anything. I want to blow that out of the water, and this was also illustrated within this documentary. A child, an adult said when he was a child, he felt angry, sad, confused, low, abandoned, anxious, ignored. We see, we hear, we feel, we hold on to all of that. Yeah. Now, Ian was saying, when you grow up with violence, it stays with you. It changes you. He said the experiences left him with a lot of anger, and that played out on the pitch. He felt constantly on edge. He couldn't calm down. And he says now, in hindsight, he regrets some of his actions. He's ashamed of it. And he pushed many good people away with his anger. And I know so many adult victim and survivors that have expressed that. The anger either makes them self-harm in some way, or they explode and the anger goes on to other people. And that's where I want to explore this victim perpetrator just a little bit more. Bearing in mind what I've just said. Now, Ian's never abused anybody, okay? physically abused anybody. But if you can think about what I've just said, he felt on edge, couldn't calm down. Yeah, he would express his anger on to people, and that eventually pushed people away. He also said that domestic violence can cause a vicious cycle. Some people will grow up and try and get help with how they're feeling, but others will go on to commit violence against their own family. And he also said it was really important that if someone wants to change and they do all of the work to change, that they need to be supported. Now, many victims and survivors think that perpetrators of abuse, especially child sexual abuse, that perpetrators can't change. They are who they are and they will constantly do what they do. But there was one man in this documentary that recognised that the abuse that he was perpetrating was a result of what he had experienced as a child, and he just literally had a 9-month-old baby, and he didn't want all of what he was doing to pass on or for his child to see it. So the organisation that he was working with, called the Hampton Trust, was explaining to him what abuse was, and what he was actually doing was abuse. And even though at first he couldn't reconcile that, he did eventually understand that what they were showing him is what he was doing. And people like this, perpetrators who want to change, they need these skills and strategies to use in the family home, so that the child or children within that home are exposed less to domestic violence and abuse. So again, dealing with this situation of domestic violence and child abuse isn't straightforward and easy. And many victims and survivors that I know do not want to understand perpetrators, do not want to think about perpetrators getting help and support. But if we don't look at this from all angles, and if we don't understand it from different perspectives, we are not going to be able to offer a whole solution to the issue that is very prevalent within our society. So even though I never used to want to give perpetrators the time of day, there are grey areas where we need to start having conversations and start offering the support that is needed, especially for these people that have been victims and now find themselves being a perpetrator, but they want to change, and they do change. And it's got to be a beneficial situation for everybody if those that want to change do change, and they go back to being members of society that are responsible, caring, nurturing and loving rather than violent. Yeah. Again, I caveat all of this because I know some individuals are just violent, abusive, and they won't change. They just won't. But we have to open up room for those that do and can. Sorry, I'm just collecting my thoughts. So Ian was saying it's really important to break the cycle. Recognising that you have been abusive is an eye-opener to many who have become perpetrators. Exploding, hitting, breaking things is an expression of hurt, and you need to help yourself to change so that your partner, your children will all benefit. And now I just want to talk a little bit about Ian's situation, where his mum was a victim stroke perpetrator. Yeah. And there was another brave lady on the documentary that was sharing her lived experiences. You know, she was in a domestic violent relationship. She began drinking heavily, and she started shouting at her daughter a lot of the time, saying that the daughter reminded her of the father, and she would then blame the daughter for the abuse that was perpetrated by the dad. Again, she recognised that she needed help, and she went to get therapy to start the healing process. So that's a female doing that. Okay, so it's male and female can be victim stroke perpetrators, and they've gone to get the help to help them turn their lives around. And Ian said, hearing that from this lady, he now better understood his mum's perspective and her point of view, that she was a victim of her own circumstances, and now that he felt that he was in a position to forgive her, and he needs to do that for himself and for his kids, because the anger that is burning up and churning up inside of you doesn't hurt anyone else. It hurts you first and foremost. And then, by the way, I'm speaking to myself here as well. And then it also comes out in the way that you interact with other people and how you respond to things. And you know what? Going through abuse, you've got every right, and here I would usually swear, but I'm not going to. You've got every right to be angry. It's a natural, normal response of going through abuse. But one of the things is we need to acknowledge what we've gone through and realise the impact, the anger is there because of the causal problems, the abuse, and we need to just know that the anger is fine, but if it becomes destructive in your life, that's what you need help with. That's what you need support with. Yeah, because it doesn't hurt anybody in the first instance but you, and then ultimately, well, it still hurts you because you do push people away. You do lose the opportunities. Your anger might have got you into trouble with the law, for example. You might have exploded your anger out on somebody in a physical act, domestic violence, or a child abuse, yeah? And you never meant it, but it's the anger within you that needs dealing with. So, abuse creates a vicious cycle, and it's up to all of us to break that cycle. Wow. Okay. So there's my thoughts and my feelings on the Home Truths programme. Just sharing a few of my own lived experiences into the mix. I would love to know what you think about what I've said. Is there any comments? No. I did this at this time of the day because I now need to offload all of this that's been sitting with me for a couple of weeks now, because I've had to go through all of my own stuff with the solicitor and working within child abuse every single day, helping survivors, listen to my siblings. It stirs up a lot of stuff for me. So again, if you are someone in a similar situation to me, where you are doing the work, but you're also going through things as well, it's a double whammy. You have to keep yourself healthy, safe and well. You need to put your boundaries in place, and you need to do a lot of self-care and a lot of grounding. Okay, so my friends, if you are able to, I would love you to share this video. I would love to hear your comments, and I would also love to just connect with you, really. And yeah, if you want me to do any more talks on anything else, please feel free to just get in touch with me, and we can have some more conversations. So this is all about opening up the conversations, looking at domestic violence and child abuse from different perspectives: the child's, the victims, the perpetrators, the institutions, and victim stroke perpetrator. But what I want to clear up, one huge myth before I go. If you've been abused as a child, you will become an abuser. Completely and utterly myth. However, if you are an abuser, there will often be abuse in your past. That doesn't excuse it, but there's an understanding there. And everything that I've shared with you today, I hope you can see that angle. Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for listening to me. And as I said, please share this video, and any questions I will come back and answer later. Take care everyone. Have a good weekend.